Hi, Steve Gamache with another Chef Knives to Go quick look product video. And here it is, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. This is the Teruyasu Fujiwara Nashiji Gyuto 240mm knife. This much heralded line of knives has a core steel of Shirogami or white paper #1 carbon steel. And one of the defining characteristics of this blacksmith is the high heat treat rating that they apply to this steel. So it's 64 to 65 Rockwell, which is very, very hard for white #1. And the construction of this is a stainless steel cladding over the top of that white #1. And it's a nicely kind of refined, rustic Nagisi or pear type finish, which is what Nagisi means, kind of the surface of a pear. And it's beautifully, beautifully done. It's not super highly textured, but it's got enough character to it and some indentation marks from the hammer that's been used, and it looks hand forged, but it's very refined, rustic. It's really a beautiful finish. It's really hard to see on this particular knife the way that they've got the edge kind of polished up, and it's really hard to see exactly where that core steel is, but it does come through. It's just hard to show on camera. I don't know if you can even pick that up. It's really hard to show, but it does come through. And they are not bashful about the bevel that they put on this edge. It's got a fairly wide bevel. What I mean by that is an acute angle. So they're not shy about the sharpening angle on this white #1 steel at all. They've put a pretty darn acute, aggressive edge on this. And so let's get back to the specs on the knife. The weight on this is 6.9 ounces, so a middleweight, and 195 grams. The blade length is 245, so it's a little bit oversized, a little over 9.5 inches, and the overall length is 15.7. The spine at the base, this knife is not thin, but it's superbly convex for great performance despite that. And so it's about 3.4 right here, but then it just starts tapering down, and this knife has a continuous distal taper all the way down the blade. And especially when you hit the grind about right here, it tapers out, of course, quite thin towards the tip. And this lends itself to really good performance through things like onions and stuff, where you wouldn't think a blade like this would do it. It really does do it well. The blade height is pretty generous on this particular sample at 51.5 millimeters at the heel. Every knife's going to be a little different since these are hand-forged and handmade, but this particular sample is that height. If you've got a particular preference, you might be able to ask Mark to pick a short one or a tall one in the notes. The octagonal handle is just basic hoe wood, nothing fancy, nicely done. Black buffalo horn ferrule, approximately 3-inch circumference, so real great fit and finish on the handle, nice install. This is their classic Japanese style handle install where you see a little bit of the tang called the maki showing. And this is Teruyasu Fujiwara's kind of signature is the way they curve this in. Instead of just going straight 90, they curve it in, and that's their little signature style on this. And what that does is give you two things. It gives you room behind the blade, called the choil right here, and the start of the handle for your finger to fit on a pinch. And also, if the handle comes loose, you can tap it on for a little bit more. You got some room there to tap the handle on if it becomes loose. That's a traditional purpose. So this knife has a wonderful gap here that fits very nicely for a pinch grip, and that's lost sometimes on some knives. You just don't have as much gap there, so it feels great for a pinch grip. Speaking of that, let's talk about the balance point on this knife. It's a little bit blade heavy since the handle's pretty darn light, and that does give you some nice cutting power though. So the balance point's kind of up here, and your pinch grip's a little bit back here, but it's not too far forward. It does have a bit forward balance weight feel to it, but that does lend chopping power, which is kind of what this knife is about. The edge on this knife, the grind is superb on this knife. It's just done extremely, extremely well, and that's part of what makes it cut so good is the grind. So it's pretty thin behind the edge, not super duper thin, but the convexing grind really sets it apart. I'll get to that. The profile on this has got a real nice flat spot towards the rear and then a gentle curve. So this does, it's a little bit longer knife, as we've shown 245, so they've got room for a little longer flat spot. And it does lend itself quite well to a variety of cutting styles. I honestly had a little trouble rocking this on the board. The cutting board I've used, at least for this, is a smaller one, and it's pretty soft cherry. And this thing's so darn sharp, it actually was digging into the board, and I couldn't really slide it on a rock chop. But it does have a good profile for that. And speaking of that, these have some of the best out-of-box edges of any knife I've ever seen, probably even just slightly better than Masakage, which is saying something. So tremendously sharp edge with some bites. It's just probably a good 8 out of 10. It's a great, great edge, and this baby is totally ready to go right out of the box. Fit and finish on this is just superb. You've got some relief on the spine and also really nice relief on the choil neck area. So you can take this out of the box and you're just absolutely ready to roll with this thing. There's nothing you need to do to it. The convexing, if we kind of look at the light on here, you'll see the convexing of the blade. It just goes so nicely at the shinogi line and then convexes down towards the edge. And this is done so well that this thing just absolutely flows through product. One of our most experienced forum contributors and moderators who's got decades of experience in the kitchen recently got this and worked with it for a good month or two and said that this is one of the best cutting knives he's ever used, and it just flows through product like nothing he's ever used. In addition, he said for this, he had the 240, that the high hardness of this Shirogami white number 1 gave him unbelievable edge retention for white number 1, in his case, something he was not expecting, and so that's one side benefit of this high hardness. It's slightly more brittle, but you do get that benefit of what's not normally seen edge retention-wise on white number 1, at least with this particular knife. It was his experience. I put this through quite a bit of different products, including butternut squash and sweet potatoes and wet potatoes, all kinds of things, and it just moves product out of the way. This thing goes through butternut squash, even cutting the ends off big squash just like butter. It goes through onions fabulously. It just does a lot of things really, really well. So it's a joy to use this knife, and it's just a beautiful piece of hand craftsmanship. You can feel the blacksmith at work in this blade. So, fantastic knife, great cutter. Is it worth the price? That's up to you, but this is one of the best performing Gyutos that you can get that's not a laser, and boy does it feel great in the hand. So there you have the Teruyasu Fujiwara Nashiji Gyuto 240mm.